Good morning, students. You are welcome to session 13th of Indian Contract Act 1872. In the last class, we have studied the meaning of consent, free consent, flaw in consent, coercion, and its consequences. Isn't it? Okay. In today's class, we are going to study the another cause for flaw in consent, that is undue influence. And we also study the consequences of undue influence. Again, we will learn the difference between coercion and undue influence. Okay. Undue influence. What it means? Undue influence is the improper and unfair use of any power. It is the improper and unfair use of any power possessed by one over the other in order to influence or induce the other party to enter into a contract. It is the improper and unfair use of any power possessed by one over the other in order to induce the other to enter into a contract. Say for example, in case of relationship, say between master and servant. Usually master has some power over servant, isn't it? But if the master uses that power in improper and unfair way to get the servant to agree for some of the agreement. If the master uses his power in improper and unfair way over the servant in order to get the consent of the servant to enter into an agreement. That is an example of undue influence. ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ಒಂದು ಪವರ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಹಿಂದೆಯ ಆ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಪವರ್ ಅನ್ನ ಅನುಚಿತವಾಗಿ ಅಥವಾ ನ್ಯಾಯಯುತವಲ್ಲದೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಿ ಒಂದು ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟಿಗೆ ಕನ್ಸೆಂಟ್ ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋದು. ಓಕೆ, ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ಒಂದು ಪವರ್ ಇದೆ. ದೇ ಆರ್ ಯೂಸಿಂಗ್ ದಟ್ ಪವರ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಪ್ರಾಪರ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಅನ್ಫೇರ್ ವೇ. ಓಕೆ, that is called undue influence. Here physical injury ಇರೋಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಮಾರಲ್ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಮಾಸ್ಟರ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ನನ್ನ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ ನಾನು ಕೇಳಬೇಕು, ನಾನು ಅವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಹಾಗ ಇದನ್ನ undue influence ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. This is some moral pressure. This is not physical injury like coercion. But here there is moral pressure. Okay. Because in some relationship, one party has power over other party. If that party using that power in improper and unfair way in order to induce the other party to get the consent to the agreement, that is called undue influence. Okay. Undue influence may be present in many relationships, not only in the case of master and servant. See, section 16 class 2 of the Indian Contract Act lays down that or it presumes undue influence in some of the relationship. Say father and son, doctor and patient, solicitor and client, trustee and beneficiary, see police officer and accused, income tax officer and assessee, promoter and company, like this. Father has some parental influence over son, isn't it? Likewise, doctor has some power over patient. Usually patient believes whatever the doctor says. isn't it? And usually patient is ready to pay the unreasonable amount or fees charged by doctor, because patient always believes doctor. Likewise the student, there is the power, the teacher has some power over student. There may be the chances of undue influence. Okay. So law has presumed undue influence in this relationship also. Say guardian and ward, husband and illiterate wife. Law presumes the presence of undue influence in this case because she is illiterate lady. So husband can use his power over her to get her consent to enter into an agreement. Master and servant, the best example. See, a master has advanced loan of rupees 1000 to his servant. Later on, master took signature of the servant in a blank paper. Okay. After some time, master wrote in the blank paper that he had advanced 10,000 rupees to servant. Okay. Here there is a chance of undue influence. There is undue influence here. If the servant wants to set aside the contract, he need not to prove that he was influenced by master's power. Okay. Because law says there is the existence of undue influence in relationship, say master and servant. Likewise, father and son. Father has some parental influence over son. Say example, father had advanced some amount, say 10,000 rupees to his son. After the son becomes major, father is demanding the son to execute a bond that he had taken 15,000 rupees. Okay. There is the presence of undue influence. And religious advisor and disciple. A disciple is selling 1 lakh rupees worth property to his religious advisor for 50,000 rupees. There is the chance of undue influence because religious advisor may have influenced or he had used his power over his disciple to get the consent to the agreement for lesser amount. So, these are all the cases of undue influence. In this relationship, law presumes the presence of undue influence. Okay. But in some relationship, law has not presumed undue influence. Example, husband and wife. But there is undue influence. Law presumes undue influence in case of husband and illiterate wife, but not in case of husband and wife. Mother and daughter, grandfather and grandson, creditor and debtor, principal and agent, landlord and tenant. Here, law has not presumed any chances of undue influence in these cases. Okay. Got the point, students? Undue influence is the improper and unfair use of power already possessed by a person over other in order to get the consent of the other to the agreement. ಆ ಅದರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಇರ್ತಾನಲ್ಲ, ಅವನು ಆ ಪವರ್ ಇಂದ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಹಾಗೇನೆ ಒಪ್ಪಿಕೊಂಡು, ಅವನಿಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟ ಇತ್ತೋ ಇಷ್ಟ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಆದ್ರೂ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಗೆ ಒಪ್ಪಿಕೊಂಡಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಪಾರ್ಟಿಯ ಪವರ್ ಆ ತರ ಮಾಡಿಸಿರಬಹುದು. ಓಕೆ. So consequences of undue influence. ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಪರಿಣಾಮ undue influence presence ಇದ್ರೆ? Again, like coercion, it is voidable. It is voidable at the option of aggrieved party. ಆಯ್ತಾ, ಅಗ್ರೀವ್ಡ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಯ ಆಪ್ಷನ್ಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು. coercion ತರಾನೆಯ it is voidable at the option of aggrieved party. He can avoid the contract or he can abide by the contract. He can avoid the contract. That means he can refuse to perform the obligation. He can refuse to perform his part of obligation. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಪರ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಮಾಡದೇ ಇರಬಹುದು ಇವನು. ಅದರ್ವೈಸ್ he can abide by the contract, ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಬಹುದು. ಸೊ this is voidable. Like coercion, undue influence is also, in case of undue influence also, aggrieved party can avoid the contract or abide by the contract. Who has to prove now? If the aggrieved party wants to set aside the contract, then he has to prove. In which case? In cases where law presumes the existence of undue influence, say master and servant, doctor and patient, father and son, religious advisor and disciple. So, in such cases, law presumes the existence of undue influence. So, the party seeking to avoid the contract need not to prove undue influence. Undue influence in ground ಮೇಲೆ ರಿಸೈನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಅವಾಯ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಸಿದ್ರೆ ಅವಾಗ ಅಗ್ರೀವ್ಡ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ನೀಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಟು ಪ್ರೂವ್ ದಟ್ ದೇರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಅನ್ಡ್ಯೂ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್. ಓಕೆ, ಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ ಅಗತ್ಯನೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಲಾ ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ಪ್ರೆಸ್ಯೂಮ್ಡ್ ದ ಪ್ರೆಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಅನ್ಡ್ಯೂ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಸಚ್ ಕೇಸಸ್. ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಇದ್ದೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ ಅಗತ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. Just he can avoid the contract. Okay. But in other cases where law does not presume the existence of undue influence, ಇನ್ನು ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕೇಸ್ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಹಸ್ಬೆಂಡ್ ಅಂಡ್ ವೈಫ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮದರ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಡಾಟರ್, ಇಂಥ ಕಡೆನಲ್ಲಿ undue influence ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿಲ್ಲ ಕಾನೂನು. So in such case, if the aggrieved party wants to avoid the contract on the ground of undue influence, that person needs to prove the presence of undue influence. ಅವರೇ ಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ, ಹೌದು undue influence ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂತ. ಓಕೆನಾ? So now we have got an idea about both coercion and undue influence. ಎರಡರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೂ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದೆ ಈಗ. Can we differentiate between them now? Okay. We can make some difference. We can point out some difference between coercion and undue influence. Students, you already knew in case of coercion, there is the use of physical force. Isn't it? Physical force na balastar to get the to get the consent from the other party. But in case of undue influence, they won't use any physical force. Master does not use any physical force. Father does not use any physical force. He just put moral pressure on the servant or moral pressure on the son. Isn't it? ಆ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಇಂದನೇ ಮಾರಲಿ ಒಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಆಗೇನೆ ಒಪ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು. ಅಯ್ಯೋ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಏನ್ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೋ ಏನೋ, ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೋ ಏನೋ, ಕೆಲ್ಸದಿಂದ ತೆಗ್ದ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೋ ಏನೋ. ಕೆಲ್ಸದಿಂದ ತೆಗಿತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೆದರಿಸಿರಲ್ಲ, ಹೆದರಿಸಿದ್ರೆ ಕೋರ್ಷನ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡತ್ತೆ. ಬಟ್ ಆ ಪವರ್, ದ ಯೂಸಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ದಟ್ ಪವರ್. ಸೊ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೋರ್ಷನ್ there is physical force. In case of undue influence there is moral force or moral pressure. Coercion may be even done by third party. ಮೂರನೇ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿನೂ ಹೆದರಿಸಬಹುದು. ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟಿಗೆ ಒಪ್ಕೋ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ನಿನ್ಗೇನೋ ತೊಂದರೆ ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ third party can use coercion. But in case of undue influence done by stronger party, undue influence is done by stronger party. In case of master and servant, who is stronger? Master is stronger, no? Likewise, in case of father and son, who is stronger? I am not talking about the physical strength. But relationship wise, father has some parental influence over the son. So he is considered as stronger. Isn't it? So stronger party influence the other party. In case of coercion, between the parties, between the contracting parties, there may not be any relationship requires. ಯಾವುದೇ ತರಹ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಇಲ್ಲ. But in case of undue influence, it requires relationship between the parties, say doctor and patient, father and son, solicitor and client. Okay. Coercion amounts to criminal offense. But undue influence does not amount to criminal offense. Okay. As the coercion amounts to criminal offense, it is punishable under Indian Penal Code. But undue influence is not punishable under Indian Penal Code. And in case of coercion, none of the parties has dominating position on the other. Andre dominating position irodilla. But in case of undue influence, one party has dominating position on the other. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಪವರ್ ಇರೋದು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡುವಂತ ಪವರ್. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ he has some influential or dominating position on other person. In case of undue influence, in some relations, law has presumed there is the presence of undue influence. But there is no such presumption in coercion under law. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಂಥ ಕಡೆ coercion ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ presumption ಇಲ್ಲ. In case of coercion, consent is obtained by threat of offense. Okay, threat, by using some threat, physical force, maybe committing or threatening to committing, or destroying property, detaining property, etc. But in case of undue influence, consent is obtained by putting some moral pressure, ಮಾನಸಿಕವಾಗಿ ಒತ್ತಡ ಹಾಕಿ ಮಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದು. In case of coercion, the aggrieved party can rescind the contract or avoid the contract. Again, he can claim for damages. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಅವಾಯ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡೋದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನನಗೆ ನಷ್ಟ ಆಯ್ತು, ನನಗೆ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಯ್ತು ಅಂತ ಡ್ಯಾಮೇಜಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಪರಿಹಾರನೂ ಕೇಳಬಹುದು. ಬಟ್ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ undue influence, aggrieved party can avoid the contract. Just he can avoid the contract, but he cannot claim for damages. Damages ಅನ್ನ ಕ್ಲೈಮ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಥವಾ ಪರಿಹಾರನ ಕೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಬರಲ್ಲ undue influence ಅಲ್ಲಿ. ಓಕೆನಾ? So these are some of the differences between coercion and undue influence. Students, remember, coercion is using or committing of some act, maybe committing such act or threatening to commit such act, which are punishable under Indian Penal Code. Okay. Physical injury, it may include physical injury or detaining, unlawful detaining of the property, or threatening to detain, killing, beating, defamation statements, rape, etc., etc. They are amounts to coercion. But in undue influence, there is no such act. Here there is influence of whatever the power already one possessed over the other. He uses that power in improper way in order to get the consent of the other party to the agreement. Okay. Okay. We shall move to multiple choice questions. Law presumed undue influence in which of the following relationship? Master and servant, doctor and patient, husband and illiterate wife, all of the above. Think and answer. Okay. Undue influence uses physical threat, moral pressure, all of the above. In case of undue influence is proved, then the contract becomes voidable at the option of aggrieved party, void, illegal, all of the above. Presence of undue influence has to be proved by whom? Aggrieved party, guilty, relatives of aggrieved party, none. In which of the following cases law does not presume undue influence? Mother and daughter, teacher and student, husband and illiterate wife, doctor and patient. Okay. Try to answer for these MCQs on your own. Okay. Okay, students, we shall put an end to this session.